Hello, hello. What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee, the talking circle, blank face. And you guys know where to find me. We got the early bird Artcast going, and we got Mr. Scott Serkland here. And we have obviously technical difficulties. For some reason, my camera doesn't want to work today, but the audio works, so we're rolling with it. What's up, Scott, man? How you doing? And let people know where they can find you.
I'm doing good, Marshall. How about you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah,
Um,
you. Oh,
Go ahead.
no, okay. Yeah, you can find me. I'm at circworks.com. It's SERKWORKS. You can also find me at Circworks on YouTube. And if there's a social media platform that I'm on, it'll be Circworks. Luckily, it's a unique enough name that I don't have to I can usually get it, and I don't have to change it around too much, which is helpful because you can just say, oh, just go here, anywhere. So.
Absolutely. And you also have a certain tool that you like to promote sometimes. There's a
Yeah.
there's a link in the description, and there's also still that coupon if it still works. It's in there. So let people know a little bit about that real quick before we
Yeah,
start.
well, okay, so there's a couple. There's one that's called the Comic Maker Starter Kit, and that one is actually free. It's kind of a scaled down version of the larger one, which I'll mention in a minute.
Mhm.
But basically, all you have to do is join my mailing list, and you'll get that. And it's got some brushes and fonts and digital templates, and and of course you can print those out so you can work traditionally or digitally, however you want. But just some tools, some really cool tools for creating comics. There's some halftones and some speed lines and things in there. Some storytelling templates, so not only just drawing but writing as well. So that's at my website at circworks.com. You can get that one for free. And like Marshall said, I gave Marshall a special coupon for the Comic Maker Toolkit, which is about 3 or 4 times the size of the starter kit, and it's just got tons and tons of stuff there. So, and I guess just follow that link. Yeah, I mean, definitely follow the link because I gave him a pretty decent discount, I think. And it's on top of that, I think it's on sale anyway. So that's you add all that in, and I think that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely recommend it. I've been playing around with the tools myself, and there's definitely some really good stuff in there. And some of these tools, even though some of them might be specifically for Pro Tools or I'm sorry, Photoshop. I'm mixing up programs, but Photoshop or I think you got them for Clip Studio. Some of the tools,
Yeah.
you might not be able to use the brushes in every program, but like even if you're working in Procreate, the templates are great. You can still use that. You can still use the character design templates. You can
Mm-hmm.
use, like the speed lines. You can use all kinds of stuff in any program. So, even if you don't use Photoshop or Clip Studio, I still recommend it. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, the problem is when I was designing the brushes, it just every program has their own unique sort of brush engine and everything. So even trying to duplicate the Photoshop brushes in Clip Studio and trying to get them I mean, they're a little different just because brushes work differently, but trying to get them as close to each other as possible was really difficult.
Mm,
So I haven't really I have Procreate, but I haven't really tackled. Every time I go into it, I just don't like the way the brushes work. So I've been on my iPad. I've been using, and all I'm really doing on my iPad is just sketches. I don't really go to color or inks or anything like that. So, but on my iPad, I just use the Autodesk Sketchbook program. But I do have to get into Procreate, and maybe eventually I'll have like a separate, like a Procreate version. I would like to do Procreate brushes. I also want to get into doing Affinity Designer and all that stuff. So, but it's just all that stuff takes time. But yeah, I try to make it as versatile as possible. There's, in addition to like the PNG files, which are pretty much universal, like you said, you can bring those into Procreate. But also, even if you, for certain things, if you work in Illustrator, I think there's either Illustrator or EPS like for the halftones. So like if you needed to like scale them up big, they're vector and everything. So there's tons of different ways. So I think there's got to be some, not, you might not be able to use everything depending on what program you're in, but there's got to be something for everyone. So
Yeah, I mean, even some of the tools you can use traditionally too. If you have a printer, you can print out.
yeah,
Um,
that's what I do.
yeah, you can print out some of the stuff. I'm definitely going to be doing that. I just literally just got a printer yesterday, so I'm looking forward to that. So there's that, and I don't know. It's just really cool that you won't be sad or you won't have like buyer's regret if you get it, especially with the discounts. Um, so yeah, what I wanted to talk about though is like, there's some interesting things that you and I have both done. Actually, it's funny because our YouTube channels in some ways parallel each other. We do a lot of similar things, but we kind of have our own take to it. And I think what you can't get from mine, you can get some stuff from your channel, and vice versa. There's always a cool thing with the unique takes that you can get from different people, and one thing though that we both have done is talking about using like weird art supplies, weird art tools, and I know those videos do pretty well. They're kind of fun, and people just enjoy that. And something else we both have done is we've talked a lot about mini comics.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today because, you have something coming out soon that's going to help people in that process. And I'm also going to be doing something similar, not quite what you're doing, but I'm doing like you know how they have like, the 3 marker challenge or like, all these different challenges
Yeah,
on
yeah.
YouTube. I'm going to do that, but with comics. So like the 3 marker comic challenge or
Oh,
like,
cool.
the Crayola comic challenge or something. So it goes right in time with like what, the kind of mini comic thing. And then you're going to have like these classes, like this kind of whole class thing that goes from beginning to end, with how to make comics. And it's just, I think if you pay attention to both of our channels, you're going to get a lot out of this, especially if you're a beginner. But even if you've been doing it for a while, I think there's going to be some pretty cool things. So, I mean, we both kind of started out getting to know each other through mini comics.
Mhm.
You want to talk a little bit about your experience with mini comics and stuff?
Yeah, definitely. First, I just want to say, yeah, I mean, if you love Marshall's channel, I think you'll like mine, and vice versa. Obviously, we're on Marshall's channel, so if you're not familiar with me, it's hard for me to send people to Marshall's channel. I mean, but yeah, I mean, and we've done collaborations and everything. We did the Take Me to Your Leader Tuesday, and I would love to have Marshall on more. And I do a show called the Artcasters, which is just like a kind of a long form like talk, usually about comics or art in general or whatever. But we record late at night, and that just doesn't work for Marshall. So as much as he's got an open invitation to pretty much come on that show anytime he wants, but it just doesn't work. But yeah, I mean, I think our two channels go hand in hand. I mean, we're both big fans of comics. We've known each other for a long time through comics. I think it was, I don't know if prior to if we knew I probably knew before we started the mini comics dump truck, probably just through, the art and story, just being in their whatever forums or whatever. There used to
Yeah,
be
they
a,
have that forum behind the paywall. I think we were both in there.
okay, yeah, yeah, and even before then, I'm sure I saw you in comments or whatever, even before they started that, because
Mhm.
so yeah, there was an old program. It was Jersey Droz, Mark Rudolph, and Kevin Cross had a show called Art and Story. Yeah, Art and Story. So and it was a podcast, and then did they start doing video? That was probably later. But anyway, so there was a podcast, and then they created a group. But basically, Kevin Cross, who you guys may know if you follow Marshall or myself, you probably know about the 100 Days of Making Comics Challenge. That was started later, but kind of a precursor to that was a thing that Kevin started. I mean, he's just full of ideas. He comes up with all these cool ideas.
Mhm.
But he did this thing called the Mini Comics Dump Truck, and basically what it was you get, and he tried it a couple times, and I think we were in like the second or third iteration of that. Um, but basically, you get a bunch of people together, and you create a mini comic. I think it was 8 pages, something like that. And then you have I forget how many days you have. Let's say 100. It might be more or less. I don't remember. But you create a mini comic, and then at the end of that period, everyone gets to share it. So you create one book, but in return, you get all these other books. And I know he kind of struggled with it a couple of times because the first time some people wouldn't deliver on their comics, and they still get all these other comics. So it's kind of, so basically, eventually, I think they put it behind a paywall, or just, was it? I forgot exactly.
Yeah, it was for the Art and Story Plus or whatever
Yeah,
that
yeah.
thing was.
So yeah, so we did that, and I've got a bunch of cool mini comics, including some from Marshall, and I kind of went a little crazy, and I went a little beyond the 8-page format, but that's really what got me back into, actually, that was the first time I think I actually fully completed a comic, because before then I would start something and redo it, and that was a constant cycle of constantly redoing the same thing, trying to get it perfect. And I kind of said, well, I got to get this done. And that accountability is a big thing. And that goes on to like the 100 Days to Make Comics and all that stuff. But so I said, I've just got to do this. And I was happy with the result. And that actually was that ended up being the comic that I'm still working on today. That was the first issue. It was a mini comic. And then I eventually made a standard version. And since then, every time I release a new issue, I also do a mini comic. And I like to go a little crazy with the mini comics and make them like deluxe. Like I'll cut the paper out, or do, just do fun stuff. Because when you're working with low volume and stuff like that, you can really personalize it, make it super fun. So
Yeah, absolutely. I've always really loved the unique things you come up with those mini comics, and it's definitely worthwhile getting that edition. I remember, um, you know, back then at that time, Mark Rudolph was doing some really cool things with mini comics. They all really were. But Mark Rudolph, I always loved how his site was set up. It was really simple. You could go into his site, and he'd have like his comic section, and then he'd have like just a couple simple tiers. There'd be, you could just get the comic, or you could get the artist edition.
yeah.
And the artist edition always had something cool and extra, or maybe there was just a sketch in it or something. And I feel like that's kind of what you did with your mini comics. You like made that artist edition, and it was always cool to get that version of it.
Yeah, it's fun. And, you got to charge a little more, but it's like you're getting a piece of that artist. I mean, if you do it that way, I mean, they're really putting a lot of time in it, and it's something special. And I've had other people that have done stuff like that. I know Sarah Turner from what's her company? I forgot the name of her company, but she kind of guessed on the art and story thing, but she did some really cool mini comics. Like, do you remember the one with the like ghost hunters, or I forget what it's called?
Yeah, I always
Um,
remember that one.
it
It
was
was really
screen
cool.
printed, and it had like transparent pages because there were ghosts in it, so you could kind of see through it. It was really cool. But yeah, I mean, you could just really do some interesting things with mini comics. Depending, I mean, you can use cool paper. I mean, it's just because you're putting it together by hand. It's more of a craft.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I think too. It's like, we think about, you know, everybody gets into comics for, they all have like their entry point, and it's always like something that it's not necessarily like, that most people's first comic isn't like Watchmen or Dark Knight Returns. Most people's first comic is like Sonic the Hedgehog, or like, who knows, like it could be like Casper the Friendly Ghost. I remember back in the old days, like that kind of thing was like more for kids. Like there's all kinds of like whatever show you're into or something, there might be a comic for. Star Wars is a big one that a lot of people got into comics. So, you get into comics for different reasons, and then you really start digging, you kind of get the addiction, and then you think, you finally get to a point where you're like, I want to make a comic. And you know, immediately you're like, wow, how do you make a comic? And it's like there's so much to it, and you're like, I don't know if I can make a comic. Like who does these? And you start looking into the artists, looking into the stuff, and it can get really overwhelming. Like I know for me, it was big with, back in the '90s. Was into Marvel and all these image creators who were started in Marvel, and then they went over to Image, and it was just exciting, and I was like into it. But I never really thought until later on that you can still make comics, like you don't have to be part of one of these companies to make comics. You can make mini comics. And that was, I think for both of us, Art and Story was really instrumental in that. And, it really opens up the door to anyone. Like it doesn't matter what, level of skill you're at, what art skill, what writing skill, you can make a mini comic, even if you don't even think of yourself as an artist. I've seen people make comics who just want to make something. It's a fun craft you can do with friends and stuff type of thing. Um, and so when you start thinking of it that way, anybody can get their foot in the door, and who knows what that path will bring, where that path will bring you. And it's really cool because I've seen that with, you know, doing this, my video, how to start your first comic, or however it's said, like that's been the one that's really gotten my channel going. And it's all about making mini comics. And I've seen so many people start and say, "Oh, I made my first comic finally. Like, thank you, for that, for helping me like figure this out." And it's really cool to see that. Or the other one is the 1 hour comic challenge that I created, but I got that again from Art and Story days. John O'Demafon, he introduced me to the one-page comic that you fold up into a little 6 page to 8 page comic. And people are, that's like the first comic for a lot of people, and it's like such a great way to get your foot in the door, and also to realize that the possibilities are really endless. It doesn't have to be this standard like American comic that you typically would see like on a newsstand, if they were still on newsstands, or in a comic shop or whatever. It doesn't have to be that. There's so many other areas we can go into, and it has been explored, but I think we still have a lot more we can explore.
Yeah, yeah. The funny thing about mini comics, I think if you do a YouTube search on mini comics, it's either going to be Marshall or myself that comes up like in those top spots. So until I'm sure once I think if Cartoonist Kayfabe ever puts out a mini comic, because they talk about them a lot. So if they ever put out like a mini comic specific, they'll probably knock us out of that top spot.
Probably. That's funny.
But yeah, I mean, we're both big fans of mini comics, and it's like it's just still and I've done like 2 or 3 videos on it just because I'm so passionate about it.
Mm.
But it's yeah, I mean, it's just such a cool, like, the entry level of comics is just, I mean, there's really nothing to it. You don't have to worry about your skill set or anything, because there's people making comics with stick figures that are just, and the writing's just brilliant or whatever. So try not to let that hold you back. I mean, I think the 1 hour comic challenge, although it scares me to death, at some point I gotta take that challenge. I might even do an exercise or something on my videos, and if I do, I'll definitely give you a shout out for that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it makes me nervous. But
You know,
but then I take my own advice, and don't be so precious about it. It's just about one thing. It's about sort of that challenge, and can you do this, and what can you do? Because if you can put something out, I mean, the main thing, and the thing I tell everyone about, is that start off small, make it easy on yourself. And
mhm.
once you have finished one thing, even if it's like a 1 hour thing, then you can hold that in your hand and say, I did this thing. And then you just make your next project a little more ambitious, and then the next one after that, until you are doing the 22 page standard comic or whatever. But I wouldn't even start off like that, and definitely steer away from just, my opinion is steer away from starting off with like a graphic novel or something to begin with. Start small, and then eventually build up to that.
Yeah, yeah, I feel the same way. I know some of our mutual friends have other ideas. But I do think it's pretty cool. Like if you do have this epic grand like idea or whatever, if that's what you're really motivated to do, go ahead and do it. But just know it might be really tough. Who knows? Maybe you'll make the next Watchmen or something. But at the same time, I think for most of us, we need to start with like the baby steps and stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I also want to think it'd be kind of cool to talk about like, you can do comics like just because traditionally comics have been done, in pencil and ink and, kind of scanned in and put into a book. Like, first of all, technology with the changes of technology, you don't even have to do pencils and inks anymore exactly. You can paint your comic or something, but you could do that back in the days too. Traditionally, it just wasn't a common practice. But the reason why they did pencil and ink was because it was their printing process to get they needed that clear line to be able to kind of tell these stories and really put in cool illustrations and stuff. And but there's a lot of things that we can do that isn't that, and it's okay to do that. Just because that's how it's been done doesn't mean you have to do it that way. So I'm looking forward to seeing what people come up with. I know people have done other things. They've done like ink washes and watercolors. I've seen so many different kind of comics, but I feel like we can keep pushing that, with different mediums. Have you ever thought of doing a comic in a different medium than the typical one? I know you go with the kind of traditional route usually.
Um, well, I mean, I do love traditional. Lately, I've been getting into doing a lot more digital, and I think my next comic may be all digital. Not my next comic in the series, because I think I'm gonna like I've been doing everything traditional except for the lettering and the my comics in black and white, but there is shading and that's all digital. But I think we were both involved in the 100 uh, anthology not too long ago, and that one I did all basic. Well, I did the penciling and everything digitally, and I found that really helped the process. But then I inked it traditionally. And I'll probably do that with my book just because I want it to match. If you can kind of see that it's digital and the rest of them
Yeah,
are, rest of the issues aren't, then it's gonna look a little weird. But after that, whatever that next project after I wrap up this book, I may do all digital. I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I've been watching a lot of that cartoonist kayfabe, and they're just showing all this, all these different artists doing all kinds of different things, and it makes me want to experiment more.
mm,
But on the same, I get I get shiny object syndrome, and I gotta, I'm good about like batting that away and saying no, I can't do that right now. But
yeah,
it's always in the back of my head calling me. So I try I try to stay focused as much as I can. Although I do a lot of other comics related things that aren't necessarily my comic. So in some ways, my comic does keep getting pushed back. Um, and part of that is to kind of build a brand, and you're doing the same thing like you're on YouTube, and these videos take a lot of time. I mean, if somebody just you know if money wasn't an option and we didn't have to bring in a living, whether it's a day job or freelance or whatever you do, if you could just work on your comic, then you can kind of afford to do all that. But I know with me just making the videos, and I don't really get paid. Yeah, I mean, you know what it's like. You don't really get paid much from YouTube, but you are trying to build an audience and everything. So it's like, is it really worth it to keep investing this much time in YouTube? Because I mean, you've been at it longer than me, and finally, I think now that you've kind of decided on a focus and everything, things are starting to really happen for you, and your channel's really growing. Mine's kind of stagnant, but I'm hoping this new series is kind of get it back on track. But yeah, but I love doing it. I love talking about comics. I love teaching how to do comics and all, or just art in general, and how to make a living doing art, or all the stuff that I talk about on my channel. So it takes a long time, but So I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but as far as like experimental stuff, that stuff really intrigues me, and I love watching other people do it. Right now, I've kind of just I've got to I got to finish my comic before I decide what I'm going to do next. But I would like to try some different things. I've got this watercolor set over here, and I always say, oh, I want to practice with some watercolor.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of marker renderings, with Copics and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And marker, if you can do that, then you could probably do watercolor. And I used to do watercolor back in college and stuff. And so I do want to get back into that. But for now, I don't know. I think I'll just kind of stay focused on my comic, But
Yeah.
but there's so many different ways you can create comics now. It's really, and the good thing about that is if you do find some sort of untraditional method of creating comics, that's the stuff that really can catch fire and maybe even go viral on social media. If you like, and not even the medium that you're creating comics with, but maybe the medium you're creating comics on.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you are, say if you go to Goodwill and you find, I don't know, let's say, I'm trying to think of a good example, like I don't know, like a okay, well, this isn't necessarily comics, but I remember people they'd go to like Goodwill and they'd buy those, just an old painting. And then they'd go in and they'd add things into the painting like kaijus or something like that. And that stuff went crazy on social media. So if you can find a way, if you could take that idea and integrate comics into it, and just do comics on like some weird medium that people have never drawn comics on, if it works, that could be something that you could really kind of go viral and get a lot of, that's the kind of stuff that people love, because it goes beyond just the comic book fans and it reaches the masses and it's got real crossover appeal. So I'm always thinking about something like that, but I've never really actually implemented that. But
Yeah.
it might be neat to think of other ways you can do, even if it's like as a mural or, at one point I was thinking, because if you watch my channel, the things that I like to draw are robots, aliens, zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. That's kind of my tagline.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. But one of the things what I wanted to do, and I just haven't got around to it, but be fun, was to go just take pictures of, because I've seen people take pictures of a brick wall, and then digitally they'll kind of do a mock-up to show what a mural might look like. Mm-hmm. Even though they're not actually painting it on the wall, but it looks really cool. So I was thinking taking pictures of like, I don't know, like weird, like electrical boxes and things, and then taking it into Photoshop and then going over those pictures and digitally and making those electrical boxes look like a robot or something like that, and post that. Cause that's the kind of stuff, like I said, that can kind of, reach beyond just the average, art enthusiast or whatever, and to the masses, and get a lot of shares and stuff like that. So but again, you could apply comics to that. If you can find something out in the real life, obviously don't go out there and just tag stuff, but yeah, even if you take a picture and then bring it into Photoshop and like, oh, this is what a comic would look like in front of maybe this famous building or something, I don't know. But there's all kinds of different ways that, I've got so many ideas, Marshall, of different things to do, and it's just a matter of finding the time to do them. So
Yeah, that's always the issue. Well, one thing, first I want to just kind of point out this little comment here. Michael Hing Art, he said, I did an abstract comic in 45 minutes a couple days ago, which that is awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, awesome.
That's cool that you did that in 45 minutes, no less. We're talking about an hour comic. You're doing one in 45 minutes. I was thinking about some ideas with doing that too. I think that's really creative. And, speaking about the 1 hour thing, you were saying you were nervous to do it. And I just want to say, like, yes, it's super nerve wracking, but just remember, it only lasts an hour.
That's true. That is true.
So,
But me, I'm very much like, when I set out to do something, I want to do it. I know you did it once and failed, but then you did it again and succeeded. So it's like, maybe it's just my ego but when you're doing it but it's great content for like YouTube and stuff too.
Yeah.
So
Well, if you ever feel like you need a little bit of humble pie, just be like, you know what, I'm gonna do the 1 hour comic challenge. That'll help
Yeah,
me.
I might, because I like this new series I'm going to be putting out. I'm going to be doing these exercises, and I think that might be a good exercise. So maybe as for one of those, I might have to do it and just see what happens.
Yeah. And yeah, just since you mentioned it, just remember you gotta definitely pay attention to Scott's channel. Monday, he's gonna be starting this, and it's gonna be really cool. Like if you are excited to make comics, he's going to be laying it right out there for you in this series. So, one thing I did want to say though too is, you talk about like being creative and doing things in different ways. You can also there's a lot of ways. It doesn't have to be medium. There's a lot of ways you can be creative in ways that you don't typically see. But one way that sometimes comic artists do it, I've seen, or actually before I say that, sorry, I'm a little bit jumbled here, but I just also remembered I wanted to mention because you were talking about taking photos and doing art over that, and I really love the idea of doing art on top of other paintings like that, and maybe you could scan it in and create panels with that and stuff. But that being said, Jack Kirby did some interesting experimentation, and so did some other people. I don't know if Jack Kirby was the first one to do this, but he would take. I don't know exactly how he did this. I actually want to learn like what he specifically was trying to do, but he used to. Sometimes he would put like photography or like I don't know if they were like magazine clippings like of outer space and like different kind of photography, sometimes black and white, like into his comics, and then he would like put his art over that and stuff. So this kind of experimentation has happened even in the traditional comic book world. But also what I was going to say before this was another way that you can explore, and that again a lot of artists have explored, and I think you've explored as well, Scott, is you can play around and do different styles, and or kind of a different version of your style. And there's something to be said about you kind of have your set style, and you have a way that you're comfortable drawing. Like if that's the way you feel, you don't have to experiment either. Like if that's the way you draw, that's awesome. It's like, okay, this is the way I draw. Now let me see how many awesome stories I can tell with it. Like what I want to be more creative in the storytelling, then I'm not worried about the style as much. I've got that kind of to where I like it. But you did actually play around with style recently in a comic. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, are you talking about the one I did for the anthology?
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I mentioned this a little bit before when I was doing the mini comics, I had to kind of streamline my process. So whereas before I was doing like super detailed, heavy blacks and all kinds of details and with my comic, and I knew that if I was going to get this thing done, I had to strip some of that stuff away, and kind of do a more simpler style, which I ended up liking. I think it had a lot more fluidity and everything, and I really liked the way it came out. But because and this is something to talk about. Like if for me with those bigger projects, I had to kind of simplify it a little bit, like the look of my comic Young and the Dead. But since this anthology project was only a 4-page project, I really wanted to use that as an opportunity to sort of stretch my muscles and show people that I could do something, that I could still do the more detailed stuff and play around quite a bit with panel layouts and do some interesting things. Because also one of the things that I was doing for that was I was adapting a song, a song called Synchronicity 2. Because it just, and that was what's weird, is that was a song that I'd always listened to, and it's very impactful, kind of dark, emotional, like really thought-provoking song. And I always thought that it would be cool to adapt that. So I even attempted to do that once before. I was doing this kind of exercise with some other comic artists here locally, where we would go, and it was like a drink and draw, where we would do a page, and then hand that off to somebody else, and then they would do the next panel, or do a panel and they do the next panel. And we were doing that. I kind of thought that I was going to adapt this song, and because of obviously copyright and everything, I didn't put any of the lyrics to the song. It's basically, if you've listened to the song and you watch it, it's basically, in most ways, in most cases, it's a wordless comic. There are like basically just narration boxes just to tell you where you are, and then there's some background like sound effects and things like that. But so there was a lot of experimentation, but because I needed to get everything in this song into this 4-page story, I had to use some interesting, techniques. So I used double page spreads, but there were panels spread across those 2 double pages. And yeah, I just got to play around with things. And there's a lot more like heavy blacks and stuff than typically I put in my comics and things. And I think it has a different look, So yeah, it's fun to kind of experiment with different things like that.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool to see you kind of go off in a different realm. And, things like anthologies, that's another one. Anything that's like kind of a shorter form comic, those are great ways to experiment and play around with something without too much worry that it's going to take you too much time, because it's only 4 pages. That's not a big deal, or it's only 6 or 8 pages or whatever. So, I mean, not that even that can take you a long time, but at least you're not committed to like a graphic novel or something like that. So there's a lot of things you can do for sure. And we got the crazy sparrow says, any of you guys like retro comics? And yeah, I think a lot of us kind of derive inspiration from a lot of different things. I know I've heard a lot of people talk about the website Comic Book Plus, where there's like public domain comics and stuff like that. I know I spend way too much time on there sometimes because you can just go down this crazy road. But that's a really cool place to go. But I love retro comics to the point where I think that's part of what my style is bringing old school stuff and mixing it with my own style and stuff like that. And I think you'll see some of that stuff on my channel. I think you definitely see that with Scott's work, because his comic is set in the 80s, and there's all kinds of callbacks to that. So I think, yeah, yes, I think we all like retro. A lot of us like that stuff. So I think it's really cool too. Like, I like how you kind of got into, like, you made a comic from lyrics from a song, and that's something that I've been wanting to try as well. So but also it kind of reminds me of the idea of kind of going into different genres, and I think to me that's another way to really think about a new creative way to do comics. Uh, Traditionally in America, obviously, we have focused a lot on superhero comics. Now, superhero comics haven't always been the number one kind of comic in America, but in the last, what, 50, 60 years, it has been. But, before that, there was a time where romance comics were the most popular kind of comic out there. There was also a time where horror comics, Western comics, there's a bunch of different genres have been even more prominent than superhero comics. And in other countries like Japan, it's all over the place. There is
Yeah.
no like dominant genre necessarily. So I think expanding genres is actually a really important and really healthy thing for the industry that I hope happens more and more. And I think it has through like things like Image Comics and other imprints. And there's also been, certain outliers like Scott Pilgrim, or there's been like Smile from Raina Telgemeier. There's been a lot of different little things. I guess like Mouse, somebody mentioned Mouse from Art Spiegelman. There's definitely been some different kind of comics that have kind of been outliers, and I think I hope that some of those outlier kind of comics start to become a little more on the mainstream side, And all of us making comics in these different ways can help that. I mean, heck, Scott, your comic isn't even a superhero comic, to be honest, and but it's still kind of an adventure comic. What do you think? Do you think that we should be expanding to genres, different genres, and experimenting?
Yeah, and I honestly, I mean, it's not to the extent that you would see in Japan or especially, but there are, if if even in America, there are comics for just about anything you would want. They're
Mm,
a little harder to find, but they're out there.
mhm,
I'd love to see more, but so when people say I don't like modern comics, I don't like this. I mean, just go on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or something, and people are doing different stuff. I mean, there's still a lot of superhero stuff, just because that's kind of ingrained, especially now with all the with all the Marvel movies and everything like that. But there's all kinds of people doing different comic book stories. You just have to look in other avenues and different places, and you'll find that no matter what you're into. I mean, there's so many different niches and stuff, and I would love the attitude, at least for people to understand that, where the way they do in Japan. So when somebody says here in America, where they say, oh, I don't like comics, when really what they're saying is I don't like superheroes. It's not like, you don't get people that are saying, oh, I don't like books,
mm,
because there's as many different kinds of comics as there are prose books.
mhm.
So I mean, it's like when you say, oh, I don't like books, it's not like you're saying, oh, I don't like mysteries, because everyone knows that there's many other types of prose than just mysteries. But in comics, it's not that way. They think it's like one thing. So I like that attitude to kind of change.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's definitely true. And I think it's kind of. I mean, it's not the person who we want to read its responsibility to figure that out. It's our responsibility, I think. We need to create these things and then, find ways to get that in front of people and attract them to it. And, you're a big into like kind of marketing and stuff. Like you enjoy that aspect the same way, that I kind of do, where that's also in some ways it's a creative outlet, and it also obviously helps people get eyes on your stuff. And I think us comic creators, obviously everybody's on a different level. There's, you might just want to make your own comics and share them with your friends. That's totally fine. That's an awesome part of the comic community and a vital part, I think. I think that's at the base level of what we all like to do, but there's also this aspect of kind of creating a career in it, or at least getting your intellectual property out there. And if you do a comic in a kind of odd genre or whatever, it's our responsibility to kind of be a little bit savvy. Maybe not our responsibility, but if we want to do that, we should try to be a little bit more savvy with the marketing. And there's so many fun, cool things you can do to attract people to your story, and really just getting the story out there is a big part of that. And then getting, if it's a series, you know, I've heard Scott talk about it many times, where people don't really quite catch on to what you're doing until the third, fourth, fifth book you've done. So it's good to just kind of keep reminding people, keep getting your story out there. Once people latch onto the story, then they're going to be kind of hooked, and they're going to share it with their friends if they really like it. And I kind of look forward to the day where, like, I don't know if this is coming, but I really hope it's coming. But like, I would love to make comics that, like, you're like, I don't know, like a mother or something, or even a grandmother, or the kind of the opposite of who you would typically think is comics are for. Like, any, these different demographics. I'd love to see other people getting into comics too, because, like, to your point, Scott, like it's just story.
Yeah.
They watch all kinds of different movies. They watch all kinds of different, read all kinds of different books. It's just story. It's in an illustrated form.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some ways, comic strips were sort of that way, kind of. Whereas most people, because they were in newspapers, and who read newspaper? I mean, kids didn't read newspaper. I mean, of course, I did as a kid. As a kid, you get your parents' newspaper. At least I'm talking me as a kid because I'm older now. If you're younger, your parents probably didn't get the newspaper, but but mostly adults would read comics. As I remember a long time ago, and I'm going a little tangent, but I'll try to make it quick. Um, I was developing entertainment property with somebody, and they wanted this to be a comic strip, but they wanted it geared towards kids. And it took me a while to steer them away from that towards making children's videos, because kids in general, that wasn't the target market for comics. It was adults who read the newspaper. Now that there aren't any newspapers, I mean, we've still got web comic strips and things like that. But it skews a little younger. But, and you typically, if somebody's reading a newspaper like on a bus or something, they're probably not, if it's an adult back then, there's still a stigma to reading the comics, even though everyone read them, but they read them sort of in the privacy of their own home. Whereas in Japan, if you go, people, you'll have like you said, an older woman or an older guy or whatever reading a manga like on a train or something like that. And there's no judgment about it. And I think that'll happen because it's even with like the whole nerd thing. When I was a kid, it was not cool to be a nerd. It was not cool to like comics. I mean, when I got into high school and I started dating, and stuff like that, I stopped collecting comics because that was not cool. Now it's cool. I mean, everyone likes comics now for the most part. And we're talking more superhero stuff, but I think kind of with it going in that direction, hopefully it won't be too much longer before it's a little more accepted that, and it even like, and it is even in school, whereas before libraries, there was a time when libraries kind of shunned comics as, we don't want you to, or teachers would say, no, don't read comics. But now that they know that comics can be, if you can get kids reading with comics, if you can, and then once they're starting to read comics, maybe they graduate to novels and things like that as well. Or maybe they keep reading comics. Maybe there's not as much words in comics, but if you're reading hundreds of comics, it all adds up, so but now, obviously now some libraries have people like librarians specifically that handle comics, the bigger libraries. So it's definitely, and there's whole sections. So it's getting there,
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're definitely making some good inroads with it. And somebody we were talking about Scott's comic and this anthology, and some people were asking questions in the chat. And yes, I am watching the chat. If every
I am too, and I see a lot of my friends in there. I just want to say hi. I don't have the ability to comment unless I open YouTube, and then we'll get some crazy feedback. So, but I do see all you guys in there. So, hello everyone.
So yeah, so the anthology that Scott's talking about, I also had some art in there, and so did Mike Emirates, who's in the chat. And just so you know, it's the Werewolves and Unicorns anthology for the 100 Days of Making Comics group, and you can go to, what is it? I think it's 100daysofmakingcomics.com and check out all about that stuff. And also, if you want to get a copy of that anthology, anybody who has been in it probably has copies. But I'm going to point over to Scott since he's here.
I was going to say point to you.
Well, I don't actually have it for sale on the site or anything, even though I have copies. You can get it from me if you want, but Scott actually has it on Etsy, right? If I'm correct.
Well, actually, okay. So it is available at my own website. If you're international, go to the Circworks Etsy. But if you're not international, go to my site. Right now, I'm having a problem shipping internationally through my site, but Etsy kind of takes a cut, I think, and everything. So, but if you're in the U.S., yeah, Circworks.com. My store has copies of it, and then if you're not, then my Etsy store, which is also Circworks.
yeah, so especially, since we were talking about his little story with the synchronicity lyrics, it was really cool. I definitely think it's worth checking out. Everybody did a really awesome job in that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of cool
it's a
stuff.
great book.
So that being said, again, talking about doing all this, creative different ways of kind of approaching comics. There are some really good kind of best practices, some things that are just kind of the basics of creating comics that are really helpful. And like I said, Mr. Scott here is going to have a series starting on Monday just about that. So, if you want to get a good foundation and get kind of the fundamentals going and learn some interesting things, Scott, tell us about what you're planning with that series.
Yeah, so it's we were trying to queue up a trailer, but we couldn't get the audio to work. But there is a trailer on my website that's about 3 minutes long, and it'll kind of give you sort of the rundown of what it is. And then I've also uploaded so far an introduction. That one's about 20 minutes long, but it talks kind of in depth, at least for 20 minutes, about everything that this series is going to be. But I'll kind of give you the brief version right now. It's basically, and I was really surprised, and one of the reasons why I decided to do this is because I don't think on YouTube it's really been done. I know there are a lot of like drawing classes, and there's a lot of videos on comics, and there's a few people that attempted to do something like this, and then they kind of it just didn't continue.
Hmm.
Uh, but it's going to be sort of a nuts and bolts, soup to nuts, whatever you want to call it, step by step series, basically the process of making comics, everything from coming up with your initial idea all the way to printing and publishing your book, and basically every step in between. So it'll be broken up in, like, one episode will be penciling, another episode will be inking, writing or scripting, plotting. All those will be different episodes. Now granted, even if I do I think they won't go any longer than 25 minutes, but even if I do a 25-minute episode on penciling, that's not going to teach you everything you need to know. I mean, you have to kind of take those basics and then do a little more with them. But in addition to that, I'm going to do some other things. So I'll have my proper episode where I kind of introduce the topic and give you basically the main things that you need to know about it or whatever. And then I'll do probably like a video that's an exercise, or we'll take one particular topic and dive a little deeper. And like if it's proportions or something for drawing the human anatomy or something like that, the basics will go into that. And then I also want to do these like quick tips, which are about maybe 3 minutes long. And I've done one of those too. Just to kind of, because some people, I find that on YouTube, people are really weird. Like they're like, look at something that's 20 minutes long and say, well, that's too long, I don't have time for that. But if you want to learn how to make comics, it's a time investment. So if you don't have 20 minutes to spend working on a comic, you're probably not. It's probably, maybe comics aren't right for you. Not to be too harsh, but anyway. But I do want to kind of, if I can get people in with some of these shorter quick tips and then get them interested enough. So that's why I'm doing sort of these quick tips. So it'll probably be like about 3 days a week. Monday will be the main episode, then an exercise, and then probably on Wednesday, and then on Friday it'll be like a quick tip or something. But that's basically it. Right now, there'll be 4 proper episodes, and then you can times that by 3, I guess, plus the quick tips and everything. But it's gonna be, it's gonna be a lot of content. Like I said, even with all that content, there's still, more work that you'll have to do. But that, I think, and who knows, once this thing wraps up, what I'll do after that. If it's successful, hopefully we can maybe go back and dive even a little deeper or something. But yeah, it's basically, it's a course. Obviously it's on YouTube, so it's free. It doesn't cost anything. I mean, you might be able to find something like this on like a Udemy or a Skillshare or something like that. But this is totally free. So yeah, it's just I think anyone that's interested in learning how to create comics, or even if you're a seasoned professional, I think there might be there's probably some value or some refreshers, or maybe some things that I do differently than other people. And I always say this with anything that I do, that my way isn't necessarily the right way. It's just the way that I do it. I mean, you can kind of season it to taste and take everything with a grain of salt, and you can say, oh, I like what he talked about here, but I don't want to do that, or I want to do something different. But at least I think this is a pretty good structure. It's just like How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. That's a great book. I love that book. There's certain things in there that but for the most part, it's great. So you take the good with the bad, and you kind of do what you want with it. But I think I've been working on this for a while. Everything I've been probably even maybe in a couple years, like coming up with the outlines and everything, and then filming it. So, and it's probably the most ambitious thing I've done on YouTube. There's a lot of editing, so it takes me a long time to do these and everything. So So yeah, I'm just like super excited. That's one of the reasons I actually reached out to Marshall. Can I come on your show and talk about this thing? Yeah, I'm just trying to get the word out. So if you guys are at all interested in anything like that, if you're not already following me, check out my channel. Just go watch the trailer, and if that sounds like something you're interested in, then hit the subscribe and the bell and all that stuff. And I'll be premiering every episode. So that means that when the episode premieres, I'll be in the chat. So I'll be able to talk with you guys and stuff like that via the chat. So I'm really looking forward to Monday. So yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be cool. And, I think you're right. Like, there has been a lot of people talking about how to make comics on YouTube. Mark Crilly, I mean, geez, go through his playlist and you'll find a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. The thing about
nobody's really like put it all in one nice package with a bow on top. And I think that's what Scott's about to do. So
yeah, because Mark Crilly is one of those. It's great. I mean, you can learn pretty much, and he covers basically everything, but you do kind of have to hunt around his channel, and there's not really necessary in order. Like sometimes he'll do like a little series, like part 1, part 2. So, I mean, he's got great information, and he's an amazing artist, and he's, so, I mean, I love Mark's channel is amazing. That's why he's millions of subscribers, but it's still, I think this would be a little different. And the way I do things, everyone's got their own style too. I mean, I'm kind of, if you're into like 90s Nickelodeon or Mystery Science Theater and stuff, I mean, I've kind of got a whole brand where I've got a lab coat that I wear, and I'm in this underground lair. It's kind of this mad scientist vibe and everything. So and maybe some people don't like that. Maybe some people just like, this is kind of ridiculous. This is over the top or whatever. And so it may not be for you, but it's a different way of presenting something. So even if there are some other things like that, different people bring different voices and different style to the way they present it. So if you like the style and the way that I present this information, it may be you may like it more than some other stuff that you've seen, or maybe not. It's kind of up to you. It's kind of what your taste is. So
absolutely, I just think it's going to be a great thing. And again, just that it's all going to be wrapped up in kind of one package when it's all done is pretty darn cool. And it's funny too. I think this, like I said, it's the type of thing, like with everything you do, is you kind of have to know the rules first before you break them, type of thing. And we're talking about being creative and doing some different things with comics in this, but this is really going to lay a good foundation for you. And I think we've gone around that topic pretty good, but we also have one comment here. One question. Salazar Art Nation asks, what if somebody wants to make digital comics? Is there a comic making toolkit someone can get?
Frank is always promoting my stuff. I just saw he also promoted my Patreon. Like, he's like, yeah, man, if I had the money, I would hire Frank to just promote stuff for me. So, but yeah, so yeah, well, we talked about that. He kind of came in late, but yeah, we did talk about that.
But I do want to say, like, again, just to reiterate, the comic maker toolkit that Scott has created, it's worthwhile, and I think I'd be curious, speaking about the topic of this topic today here, I'd love to see people use that toolkit in creative ways, like, just because it kind of sets certain things in motion, like let's see what you can do with it. Like, let us know what, especially Scott. He made it. Like, let him know. Let me know too. I'd love to see, because I'm gonna be, like I said, I'm gonna be making a lot of comics this year. We have in the AAA Discord, AAA creators Discord that I have. There's we have this new challenge where, like, who can make the most comics in 2020. And so it's going to be like a fun challenge, and I'm going to be making a lot of comics this year.
Yeah, I would fail there.
And a lot of those are going to go on YouTube, and I'm going to be doing things like making comics with crayons and stuff like that, and different things that are, some of it's more on the traditional side, but also some of it's digital. And I'm going to be using this comic maker toolkit throughout the process. So you're going to see some creative things from me, but I would love to see what you guys do with this comic maker toolkit. Like I said, you can get one version of it for free just by signing up for Scott's email list. I definitely, even that has a lot of stuff in it. And then if you want, you got the discount code below, and it's also on sale, so you can get it for a really good price right now, the full version of it. And I want to see. I'm really curious to see what people do with this. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, and I'll be demonstrating some of those tools that are in the kit throughout the series. Mostly, I think I'll try to stick mostly to the free version, just because I want it to be easily accessible. And the only really thing that you have to opt into is my newsletter to get that free thing. But if I can do sort of a humble brag, I have a pretty nice newsletter. It's got, every time I put out a news, like the last one I just put out, I gave out a free font. And so there's more to it than just me. I mean, I do promote my stuff in the newsletter, but like, I've got like art hacks in there. I've got an exclusive video, and then every once in a while I will give out like a free product, like a font or something like that too. So there's a lot of value to that. So but I'll try to use some of the tools that are in that starter kit throughout the video, and then every once in a while, if there's something that I really think is important, or a tool that I think is really good that may only be included in the bigger one, I may mention it, but I'm going to try to stick to, and you don't have to, I mean, you can, there's really no requirements. That's going to help if you want to follow along. But the good thing about this series, the way it's structured, you don't have to watch episode one to know what's going on in episode 2. You can jump in at any episode, because it's self-contained, but it's also a series if you want to get more out of it. So if you're only interested in the writing process of comics, then maybe you don't want, maybe you don't need to learn, go into like the penciling, the inking, and all the publishing and all that kind of stuff. But it is sort of the order, more or less, the way comics are created is the way it plays out. So again, we start off with just coming up with ideas, or I think that first episode or Monday will be just getting started. And I know you've done a video on getting started, and really, that's the hardest part for a lot of people. Like, where do I start? So I give some different ideas and some tips and things on how to get started making a comic. That'll be the first episode, and then after that's ideas, and then we go on from there.
Yeah, and apparently if you want to get started really early on checking out those videos, Frank is telling us that you can see it on Scott's Patreon too. So
yeah,
that's really cool.
I'm trying to release some, like, typically on my Patreon, I try to put the video out like a day early, but these ones, since there's so much involved, and I already have like 3 of them finished, I can afford to put those out like almost, closer to like a week in advance. So if you are on the Patreon, you can see those a little sooner. So
awesome. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to do is kind of explore this whole comic book thing, and realize that we can do, the possibilities are endless, and we're trying to help you out and give you some of the tools that'll help you along that journey. And hopefully, I just want to say, like, good luck to you guys in your comic book journey, and keep checking back on both of our channels for some pretty cool stuff with that. And thank you, everybody who's in the chat. I see Holly popped in. How you doing, Holly?
Hey, Holly. Yeah, we got to get you in the Artcast if you're available. Just put that out there, Holly.
Yeah, and Holly, to be honest, I mean, a lot of you guys in the chat, but definitely Holly and I'd love to have you on my channel too. I'm always open to that. And so, yeah. Other than that, I think we did this thing, man. So once again, I mean, we've been promoting our stuff throughout this whole thing, as well as talking about stuff. But just for the last little thing, Scott, where can people find you?
You can find me at circworks.com. And again, you can get that free comic maker starter kit there's a link right up front, or on YouTube. The main thing, that's where the video series is going to be. And that reminds me, I need to put something on my website about that. That's something I haven't done yet. There's so much that I'm trying to do to promote this that I forgot. But yeah, Circworks, just search Circworks on YouTube. Yeah, and yeah, I don't know that I don't know if the playlist is right on the front page yet, but it will be. But yeah, Monday I'm going to be premiering the first official episode. But right now there's three other episodes of Making Comics 101. There's the trailer, just to let you know, kind of give you a teaser of what that's about. There's an introduction which talks about what the series is about, and then there's one quick tip. So, and then Monday we hit the ground running, and I'll be doing that for a while on my channel.
Awesome. And you guys know where to find me, donkeyjawprojects.com and Marsh Comics on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And other than that, thank you, Scott, for coming on. That was fun. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. And we will talk to you next time.
Bye, everyone.